Hi, it's me, Brodie McLeod, and you're watching my Wastecast, which might be fortunate for you or unfortunate for you, depending on how interested you are in the subject matter and the content. I'm currently detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act at Cygnet Kewstoke's Lodge Rehab Facility. I've been here since the beginning of June, and I was admitted to the main site, Cygnet Kewstoke Hospital, Weston-super-Mare, at the beginning of July 2024. So I've been in hospital for well over a year now, with it being September and everything. Got a bit of a bumper edition today. I'm going to take you through a little narrative of kind of multiple service errors and anomalies and things that could have been done better, and I don't think really are being dealt with properly. So first point on the agenda is recording psychiatric consultations. I made a complaint against Cygnet because they weren't allowing me to record psychiatric consultations. I wrote this document actually in 2023. I'll leave a link to the PDF in the comments of this video on YouTube, but there's quotes in there from General Medical Council and the British Medical Association and the NHS policy documents relevant to recording psychiatric consultations, and Oxford University Press, British Journal of Psychiatry Bulletin, volume 46, issue 3, where it says again that it's completely fine. British Medical Association, the Data Protection Act has an exemption that says that patients' records are confidential to them. Anything said to them in a consultation by a consultant is part of their medical records. But GMC and NHS and other medico-legal jurisprudence experts all say that you're allowed to record your consultations in a psychiatric hospital. So Gemini, I asked, in the below linked publication, it clearly states with various citations that recording psychiatric consultations is legal, lawful and acceptable. Is this accurate? Let's just give you a quick look at that article. I think this is the one. It's a bit slow, but here's the article. The recording of mental health consultations by patients, clinical, ethical and legal considerations. It's peer reviewed and it's Creative Commons, open access, and I'll give you a link to that in the description as well. But I sent that document that I just showed you here with all of these citations in a complaint to Cygnet. Before I show you their response, or lack of a response, I'm just going to walk you through what Gemini says in relation to the analysis of that article. So I asked, is the below linked publication, as I've already read, but I'm reading it again, in the below linked publication, it clearly states with various citations that recording psychiatric consultations is legal, lawful and acceptable. Is this accurate? It said yes, the statement in the BJPsych Bulletin is accurate. In the UK, it is legal for a patient to record their psychiatric consultation. The legality of recording consultations. Under UK law, a patient does not need permission to record their consultation. This is because the information discussed during the consultation is considered the patient's personal data. Therefore, a patient recording their own consultation is viewed as them processing their own data. The recording is confidential to the patient, not the healthcare professional. General Medical Council's guidance aligns with this legal standpoint. GMC advises that doctors should be aware that patients may record consultations and that such recordings are permissible. While GMC encourages openness and honesty in the doctor-patient relationship, it acknowledges the patient's right to record their appointments. Practical and ethical considerations. Where legally permissible, the practice of recording consultations, especially covertly, raises some ethical considerations. Healthcare professionals may feel that covert recordings erode the trust the doctor-patient relationship. However, medical bodies generally advise doctors to continue treatment and maintain professionalism even if they discover a covert recording. For patients, recording a consultation can be a useful tool to help them remember and understand the information provided by their doctor. It can also be shared with family members or caregivers to keep them informed. I can't find the original email that I sent to them. It just doesn't seem to be there, but the reference number is there. And I got an email from Cygnet on the 29th of November 2024 with a letter advising about my recent complaint. And it says, I appreciate your patience while we investigated the concerns you've raised. The investigating officer has completed their investigation, and having considered their findings, I do not uphold your complaint. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for bringing these concerns to my attention so that we may learn from them. Whilst I'm unable to uphold some of the issues that you've raised, I accept that they are valid concerns from your perspective, and I hope this response assures you that we've taken your concerns seriously. I've responded to each of the points you've raised below. You've told me that you state you are not happy about being refused the right to electronically record your ward rounds. The decision about not recording ward rounds was made in line with the current Cygnet policies and BMA guidance, and that's kind of not accurate. If you look at the Cambridge University article in the link to in the description of this video, they talk about the British Medical Association, and the British Medical Association is totally proscriptive and says that it's allowed. So I don't see how they can be in line with BMA guidance when it contradicts their findings. It goes on to say, in your interview with the investigating officer, you did not show any overt memory impairment. You were able to retain and recall information discussed and were able to cite different articles and guidelines. I read her that document that I'd sent in. Your thinking and rationale for requesting recording appears to be still influenced by your persecutory beliefs. So, that was me. I did say that I wanted accountability from the doctors, which in the context of what you'll see in the rest of this video might make a bit more sense. Therefore, your complaint is not upheld or set out below the recommendations. As a result of your complaint, you are encouraged to share your views about reviewing Cygnet policy regarding recording ward rounds. If you've got any questions, then contact them on that phone number. If you're dissatisfied with the response, you can take it to the next stage, etc., etc. I did request an operation of review on the 2nd of June this year. I said, hello Susan, I've searched through my emails, but I can't find my original complaint with the above reference regarding my right to take recorded voice notes of psychiatric consultations. I've just been sitting for the last 20 minutes going through every email I've sent last year and this year, and it's just not in my email outbox in my sent. So I can't show that I gave them citations and references in that document because it's just a bit circumspect that email isn't in there anymore, because it's kind of disambiguous, binary, concrete, and it disagrees with their policy. I mean, it shows the policy up to be wrong. I don't recall I went on to write when I wrote to Cygnet about this issue, and importantly, which resources I provided with the complaint. But there appears to be nothing in my Gmail account when I searched for the original complaint made to address my right to record. In order to properly assess your management and diligence regarding handling of this issue, I'd like to request a dated copy of the initial complaint received, along with the date it was received, and my attachments I included as a resource to reference my right to record relative to the complaint. That was in response to an email that I got on Friday the 29th of November. I replied on the 2nd of June, and I CC'd in this guy, Alan McReady, who is an IMHA. So I said on the 2nd of June this year, 2025, formal complaint escalation, right to record consultations and ward rounds. Dear Ms. Susan Ball, I'm writing to formally request an operations director review of my complaint form further to the response I've received from Mr. Joshua Tapp, dated the 29th of November 2024. As suggested in this letter, I remain dissatisfied with the outcome of my initial complaint regarding the denial of my request to electronically record ward rounds. While Mr. Tapp's response indicated that the decision was in line with current Cygnet policies and BMA guidance, and that my complaint was not upheld due to perceived lack of overt memory impairment and the presence of thinking influenced by persecutory beliefs, I believe this response does not adequately address the fundamental reasons for my request, nor does it fully align with contemporary understanding of patient rights and, critically, the policies of the trust funding my care. My request to record ward rounds is not solely predicated on memory impairment, rather it's based on the need to ensure an accurate and comprehensive record of discussions concerning my care for the purposes of future reference clarity and to safeguard my rights as a patient. I believe the ability to review these discussions directly is crucial for my understanding of my treatment plan and for fostering a transparent and collaborative relationship with my care team. Furthermore, I draw your attention to the NHS Devon Partnership Trust's mobile devices and access to NHS Wi-Fi in the care environment policy, which is C43 version 1.4, updated, ratified as of the 15th of August 2024, which is the trust funding my medical treatment. This policy explicitly states under the section mobile devices as a recording device and inpatient and community settings that a patient in receipt of care does not need permission to record a medical consultation, unlike NHS practitioners. Such recordings made for the purposes of the meeting, either covertly or overtly. I'm not going to read you this whole email, but the British Medical Association, it's all included in the document that I sent to them to start with. And I got this one back. So, that's the one I've already read to you. I did get a service review letter, I'm sure. Anyway, yeah, it was reviewed and they just haven't got back to me about that. You're allowed to record and it shouldn't be stopped for any reason, and I'm not very happy about that. And there's been a long, drawn-out complaints procedure, which has just been left with me going to the Ombudsman. So here's another question I put into Gemini related to something that happened. If a registered mental health nurse defaces their photocard ID being used when acting as a clinical lead on an acute psychiatric ward, is this a breach of law, regulations, guidance, or policy? Gemini said yes, a registered mental health nurse defacing their photocard ID while acting as a clinical lead on an acute psychiatric ward would be a breach of policy and professional guidance and could potentially lead to consequences depending on the nature and the intent of the defacement. So a nurse just obscured her second name when she presented her ID to me, and I thought that can't be right in a clinical area. Here's a breakdown of why this action is problematic across multiple levels. Breach of employer policy. Virtually all healthcare employers, including NHS trusts and private providers, have specific policies regarding staff identification. These policies are in place for crucial reasons of security, accountability, and patient safety. Just to be clear, there isn't a publicly available Cygnet policy on wearing photocard ID. I checked. But it goes on to say identification and safety. Patients, visitors and other staff and members need to be able to clearly identify the nurse in charge. A defaced ID card hinders this, potentially causing confusion, compromising security on the ward. In a mental health setting, clear identification is paramount for building trust, maintaining a safe therapeutic environment. Professionalism. The uniform and ID card are symbols of the nurse's professional role and the trust that patients place in them. Willfully damaging this symbol is unprofessional and can undermine the perceived integrity of the individual and the wider team. Security ID. ID cards often double as access cards for restricted areas. Damaging the card can be seen as an attempt to tamper with security. That's not really relevant here. Defaced ID would almost certainly be a direct violation of the employment contract and internal policies, leading to disciplinary action, which could range from a formal warning to dismissal, depending on the severity of contact. They did used to have a biometric sign-in thing in the foyer of this ward, but they redecorated the whole thing, and from my knowledge it's not there anymore, but it had like a fingerprint scanner and maybe a thing that does scan their ID cards. I don't know, but it was out of action since July when I got here. It was just switched off the whole time, along with the TV they've got in the foyer, which is never switched on with the news on it for some reason. But there we are. Breach of professional guidance, NMC Code of Conduct. The Nursing and Midwifery Council Code of Conduct sets out the professional standards that all registered nurses must adhere to. While it doesn't have a specific rule about ID cards, defacing one would contravene several key principles, like promoting professionalism and trust. The code requires nurses to uphold the reputation of the profession. Damaging professional identification is not consistent with this duty. It can be perceived as an act of defiance or disrespect for the role and the regulatory body. Acting with integrity, intentionally defacing an official form of identification raises questions about the nurse's integrity and trustworthiness, which are cornerstones of the nursing profession. Maintaining professional boundaries, while seemingly a minor act, can be interpreted as a form of unprofessional conduct that blurs the lines between appropriate and inappropriate behaviour in a clinical setting. Such an act could be reported to the NMC, which I did report it to them, and may be considered as part of a fitness to practice investigation, particularly if it's part of a wider pattern of unprofessional behaviour. Potential breach of law and regulations. While there isn't a specific law in the UK against defacing a work ID card in the same way there is for a passport, the Act could have legal ramifications depending on the circumstances. Fraud by false representation. If the defacement alters the information on the card in a way that's intended to mislead, for example, obscuring the name or photograph to avoid identification while engaging in misconduct, it could potentially be considered an act of fraud. Criminal damage. If the card is the property of the employer, intentionally destroying or damaging it could theoretically be considered criminal damage, although it's unlikely to be pursued in this manner unless the act was part of a more serious offence. Data protection. If the defacement involves another person's details or an attempt to misuse the data on the card, it could touch upon data protection regulations. But in summary, while the most immediate and certain consequence for a nurse defacing their ID card would be disciplinary action from their employer for breach of policy, also represents a clear departure from the professional standards expected by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Legal repercussions, although less likely, are not out of the question depending on specific intent. So I had a meeting with the manager about this, and eventually I just dropped the complaint. So I'm just referencing that this happened and putting it in the list of things to think about relative to my detention, but I didn't pursue the complaint. I have got a letter somewhere with an operational manager's review of that recording complaint too. I just can't find it in my emails. But yeah, I do believe that defacing an ID isn't right, and I do believe that you're allowed to record ward rounds. And if we crack on, the next one is social worker conduct. So I made another video about this. If a social worker registered with Social Work England refuses to provide their work mobile number and .nhs email address to a service user, let's get my head out of the picture, under their caseload, is this a breach of regulation, guidance, policy or law? Also, if the local authority responsible for a registered social worker asserts in writing that there is no verifiable record in their administrative systems of any interaction or appointments with the social worker after said social worker having attended multidisciplinary meetings called ward rounds of a service user, they are claiming to be working on behalf of on a psychiatric ward as well as attending private meetings in person. Is this a breach of policy, regulations, guidance or law? If you've watched my previous videos over the last couple of days, I've covered this extensively. Gemini, although not qualified to provide legal advice, has advised me to contact the police about this. In addressing the concerns raised, it's crucial, it said, to distinguish between professional standards, employer policies and legal obligations. The following provides a detailed analysis of each scenario. First one's the refusal to provide direct contact information. The social worker registered with Social Work England refusing to provide their work mobile number and NHS email address to a service user is not in itself a direct breach of a specific regulation or law. However, it could potentially conflict with principles outlined in professional guidance. Social Work England's professional standards emphasise the importance of clear and effective communication to build and maintain trust with service users. Standard 2.5 states that social workers must actively listen to understand people using a range of appropriate communication methods to build relationships. So you can, sort of, it's open to interpretation really. The desire to share direct contact information often rests with the social worker's professional judgment and, more significantly, the policies of their employer, the local authority. These policies are designed to safeguard both the service user and the employee. Reasons why a social worker might not provide a direct mobile number or email address in her defence include lone working policies to protect social workers from being contacted outside of their working hours and to ensure their safety, case management procedures to ensure that all communication is channeled through a central point, such as a duty desk or team email address, which is what they did. This ensures that if the allocated social worker is unavailable, another team member can respond, preventing delays in urgent situations, and maintaining professional boundaries also to prevent the development of an inappropriate or dependent relationship. And for record keeping, centralised communication methods ensure that all correspondence is properly recorded on the service user's case file. While a refusal to provide a personal work number is unlikely to be a breach, the social worker and their employer have a responsibility to ensure that the service user has a clear and reliable way to make contact. The service user should be provided with alternative contact details such as a team phone number and email address, be informed of the expected response times, which I was totally in their defence. They did give me an unmonitored email address. Look at my other videos in the last couple of days if you want more information on that. If the lack of direct contact is hindering effective communication, causing significant detriment to the service user, a formal complaint to the local authority's social services department would be an appropriate step to address the issue. The next bit doesn't really act so much in this lady's defence. Lack of verifiable records. A local authority asserting in writing that there is no verifiable record of any interaction or appointments with the social worker, despite that social worker having attended multiple multidisciplinary meetings and private meetings, is a serious breach of professional standards, local authority policy, and potentially the law. Accurate and contemporaneous record keeping is a fundamental duty of a social worker and legal requirement of the local authority. So that might be a breach of professional standards. Social Work England's professional standards are unequivocal on the importance of record keeping. Standard 4.6 requires social workers to maintain clear, accurate and up-to-date records documenting assessments, decisions, actions and outcomes. The failure to record significant offence such as multidisciplinary meetings and one-to-one appointments is a clear violation of this standard. Such records are essential for continuity of care, ensuring that colleagues and other professionals have a clear understanding of the case, and for accountability, providing a transparent account of the social worker's actions and decisions, and of course for evidence, forming a legal record of the involvement with the service user. Breach of local authority policy. Local authorities have comprehensive policies and procedures that mandate the recording of all significant interactions with and on behalf of service users. These policies are in place to ensure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. The absence of records for the described meetings would almost certainly be a breach of the local authority's own internal policies. The legal implications. The lack of records has significant legal implications. The Data Protection Act 2018, service users have a right to access their personal data, which includes their social care records, through SAR. If the records don't exist, the local authority is failing in its duty as a data controller. The Information Commissioner's Office could investigate such a failing. So that's interesting. They're sort of saying, it might be that I don't know, it sounds like my social worker is responsible for updating the record system herself, but, what it's saying ostensibly here is that under the Data Protection Act, it would be the council that should have made sure that if social workers coming to meet with me or coming to my ward rounds or attending via Teams, all three of which she did, there should be a record of, what was discussed and, what kind of prognosis is moving forward. Public Services Ombudsman, the failure to maintain adequate records could be grounds for a complaint of maladministration to the local government and social care ombudsman. The assertion by the local authority that no records exist in this scenario is a matter of grave concern. It suggests a significant failure in professional practice by the social worker and a potential systemic issue within the local authority's record keeping systems. A service user in this position should consider the following steps. Making a formal complaint to the local authority, yeah, I might do that. A subject access request, yep, I might do that. Contacting Social Work England, I did check her social work credentials. She is a social worker, verified. But yeah, I got a tweet from South Gloucestershire City Council saying that she would have been expected to give me a .nhs and work mobile number, and over and above that, they had no records on their system of her visiting me, which is why Gemini said in light of my funding change, that I should report this whole thing to the police, which I might do tomorrow. Local government with the assistance from Cygnet, of course. Local government and social care ombudsman, again, you can complain to them. So that was kind of like another little thing that wasn't great. Hospital funding dispute. So if a patient detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act is being treated by an ICB, that stands for Integrated Care Board, determined by their place of ordinary residence, is subjected to an unexplained arbitrary alteration of Integrated Care Board almost 100 miles away from the patient's ordinary residence, is this a breach of policy, regulations, guidance or law, and could it render the detention under the detention, great grammar from me there, I slept for not very long last night, under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act unlawful? It said yes, absolutely. An unexplained arbitrary alteration of a patient's integrated care board to one almost 100 miles away from their established place of ordinary residence is a fundamental breach of law, policy and guidance. Crucially, this breach can and almost certainly would render a detention under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act unlawful. Here's a detailed breakdown of the reasons why, separated into the two parts of your question. Part 1 is a breach of law, policy and guidance. The entire NHS commissioning system is built on the principle of geographic responsibility. An arbitrary switch undermines this foundation. Breach of the Who Pays guidance. We covered this loads in other videos, but I'll read it anyway. This is the central operational rule book for NHS commissioners. The NHS funding rules are designed to provide a clear and consistent framework to establish which ICB has been commissioning responsibility for that patient. The core principle of responsibility is determined by a patient's ordinary residence. That means where you live. The guidance provides detailed rules for establishing this. The prohibition of arbitrary action. The entire purpose of the Who Pays framework is to prevent exactly what you describe: arbitrary passing of the buck between commissioners. A decision to switch an ICB that's not based on a formal evidence changed in the patient's ordinary residence is a direct violation of this guidance. An unexplained switch is, by definition, procedurally improper. Breach of the Health and Care Act 2022. This Act established the current system of integrated care boards. Each integrated care board has a statutory duty to arrange the provision of health services for the population within its specific geographical area. By unilaterally assigning responsibility to an ICB 100 miles away, the system's acting contrary to the statutory duties of both the correct ICB, which is failing to exercise its responsibility, and the incorrect ICB, which is acting outside of its geographical remit. Breach of public law principles. As public bodies, ICBs and NHS trusts must act in a way that's lawful, rational, procedurally fair. An unexplained and arbitrary decision is a classic example of maladministration and is unlawful on several grounds, partially because it's irrational. The decision is so unreasonable that no reasonable public body acting properly could have made it. Procedural impropriety. The decision was made without following the correct legal and policy frameworks, i.e. the Who Pays rules. Lack of transparency. A legitimate decision affecting a person's rights must be explained and justified. Part 2, how this renders a Section 3 detention unlawful. This is the most critical consequence. The administrative error is not isolated from the clinical detention. It legally compromises it. The procedure prescribed by law is broken. Under Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights, any deprivation of liberty such as Section 3 detention is only lawful if it's carried out in accordance with a procedure prescribed by law. The procedure prescribed by law is not just the Mental Health Act itself, it includes the entire legal and administrative framework that makes the Act function, which crucially includes the correct identification of responsible commissioner, the ICB. If the responsible commissioner is wrong, the procedure isn't being followed correctly and the legal basis for the detention becomes unsound. The inability to plan a lawful discharge, that's another thing. So this is the most powerful and definitive legal argument. Section 117 of the Mental Health Act places a joint statutory duty on the ICB of ordinary residents and the corresponding local authority to provide aftercare services for a patient upon their discharge from Section 3. If the ICB involved in the patient's care is the wrong one, 100 miles away, it's legally impossible to plan a lawful discharge. The body with the legal duty and funding responsibility for the aftercare package is not at the table. Therefore, the detention is no longer for a legitimate purpose of treatment leading to discharge because the lawful discharge cannot be achieved. This detention becomes self-perpetuating and loses its legal justification. 3. Failure of care planning and governance. The responsible commissioner has a vital role in the patient's care while they are detained. They are involved in care planning, CPA meetings, reviewing treatment, and authorising funding for specific therapies or placements. If the wrong ICB is performing these functions, or if no ICB is properly performing them due to the dispute, then the patient's care and treatment is not being lawfully managed. I did do my care plan in my last ward round. They were trying to kind of cover their arses, I think. But yeah, in conclusion, an unexpected and arbitrary switch of the responsible ICB is not a minor administrative issue. It's a fundamental legal error that unravels the statutory framework supporting a patient's detention. A court would almost certainly find that from the point this error was identified and not properly rectified, the continued detention of the patient became unlawful. The next thing I'm going to look at is my Section 3 scrutiny. So if a patient detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act is told, as I was, that their section papers have been subject to verification with a medical legal scrutiny checklist, but told somewhat illogically that although the document medical legal scrutiny checklist has been completed, the patient is only allowed to view it on a hospital computer and not retain a physical copy, as I was, is this a breach of policy, guidance, regulations or law? And does it increase the likelihood or potentiality that the detention under section may be unlawful? This situation is likely a breach of hospital policy and good practice guidance rather than a direct breach of the Mental Health Act 1983 itself, but it does raise concerns about the transparency of the detention process. Refusing a physical copy does not automatically make the detention lawful, but it could be a factor if the detention were to be challenged legally. Breach of policy, guidance or law. Your right to information about your detention is a key principle of the MHA. The MHA Code of Practice Chapter 4 is clear. Patients must be given information about their detention, including the reasons for it and their rights. While the code doesn't specifically name the medical legal scrutiny checklist, this document is part of record keeping that ensures the detention is lawful. The law, the Act itself, doesn't mandate providing a copy of this specific internal checklist. The legal requirement is that the detention papers themselves, the applications and medical recommendations, are correctly completed. So the guidance or code of practice denying a physical copy of a document you've been allowed to see goes against the spirit of transparency promoted by the Code of Practice. The purpose of these checklists is to ensure the detention is lawful, therefore preventing a patient from easily reviewing it or sharing it with a legal representative is poor practice. Hospital policy. This is most likely a breach of the hospital's local hospital or trust zone policies. I don't know which NH trust is funding me, and I don't know, Cygnet don't have a policy on this, aside from their data protection one, which I'll go over in a minute. But yeah, trust zone policies on patient information and access to records. It's an illogical position to allow you to view the document but not possess a copy, suggesting a misunderstanding of information governance rules. There is no logical or legal reason to allow a patient to see a document on a screen but refuse to provide a printed copy. This action could be interpreted as an attempt to obstruct proper scrutiny. Does this make detention unlawful? No, the refusal to provide a physical copy of the checklist does not in itself render your Section 3 detention unlawful. The lawfulness of your detention rests on whether the statutory criteria for detention under Section 3 were met at the time and whether the official application and medical recommendation forms were completed correctly. The checklist is a tool used by the hospital to verify these documents are in order. It is not one of the statutory documents itself. However, this action does increase the potential for a successful challenge to your detention for several reasons. It raises suspicion. It creates a strong impression that the hospital may have something to hide. A tribunal or a court might question why such a simple request was denied and could infer that there might be flaws in the original paperwork that the hospital is trying to obscure. It's a fair judgment or assumption. It does hinder legal advice. It makes it more difficult for you to get effective legal advice. You can't easily share the document with your solicitor for them to review. This obstruction could be viewed unfavourably by a mental health tribunal or court. 3, part of a wider picture. If there are other errors or concerns regarding your detention, which there certainly are, this refusal to provide the checklist could be presented as part of a pattern of poor practice, strengthening your overall case that the detention process was flawed. In summary, while not a direct cause for unlawfulness, this behaviour is a significant red flag. It obstructs transparency and your ability to review the legality of your own detention and could be used as powerful evidence in a legal challenge to question the hospital's conduct and the overall validity of the section. You should formally request a copy again in writing and consult with an independent mental health advocate or specialist solicitor. Doctor's ID refusal. This is another thing that happened to me. So if a GMC registered psychiatric consultant refuses to provide the details of their photocard ID badge whilst in a ward pharmacy dispensing medication to the patient because the patient receiving treatment makes it apparent they intend to check the detail of the photocard ID using the publicly available GMC website, search the register feature, is this a breach of policy, guidance, regulation or law? To be disambiguous, the full name of the doctor was subsequently provided to me in writing by another consultant psychiatrist around a week later. But what is the official stance on the initial attempt to remain effectively anonymous by a GMC registered consultant psychiatrist in the first instance during the interaction in the Hayward Ward Pharmacy at Cygnet Hospital, Kewstoke? This is a serious and valid question. It says, based on established professional standards and guidance in the UK, the consultant's refusal to provide details from their ID badge in this context is a significant departure from expected professional conduct. Here's a breakdown of why this action would be considered a breach of guidance and policy, even if not a specific citable law. The General Medical Council guidance, consultants' actions are contrary to the core principles outlined in the GMC's Good Medical Practice, which sets a standard for all registered doctors in the UK. Several key domains are relevant here. Domain 3, entitled Communication, Partnership and Teamwork. The guidance states doctors must be polite and considerate and treat patients as individuals. Crucially, says you must work in partnership with patients, sharing with them the information they will need to make decisions about their care. Analysis. Fundamental piece of information for a patient is who is treating them. Refusing to identify oneself is a complete barrier to forming a partnership. It creates immediate power imbalance and prevents the patient from making an informed decision, as they cannot verify the credentials of the person dispensing their medication. The patient's desire to use the GMC's own public register is perfectly reasonable and responsible act of due diligence. Domain 4, maintaining trust. Guidance states the doctors must be honest and open and act with integrity, which this guy didn't. He literally started hiding his ID under his armpit when I got my phone out with the GMC website. Analysis. Attempting to remain effectively anonymous, as you describe it, is the opposite of being open and acting with integrity. It immediately erodes trust. A patient has the right to know the name and GMC number of the doctor responsible for their care. Sorry, just had an interruption there. Had to pause it because somebody was knocking at my door. Didn't want them to be audible, telling me it's lunchtime. So this is a cornerstone of accountability. The consultant's refusal implies they have something to hide, which is profoundly damaging to the doctor-patient relationship and the public's trust in medical profession. Conclusion on GMC guidance. The consultant's refusal is a clear breach of the spirit and letter of good medical practice. It fails the basic test of openness, honesty and working in partnership with the patient. Hospital and trust policy. While I can't access the specific internal policies of Cygnet Hospital Kewstoke because they're not online anywhere, it is standard universal practice in UK healthcare settings, both NHS and independent providers like Cygnet, for staff to wear a photocard ID badge at all times when in clinical and patient-facing areas, identify themselves clearly to patients. This is often part of the instructions. Hello, my name's Dr. Smith. I'm the consultant psychiatrist. He did say hello and he did show me his ID, but as soon as I got my phone out, he stuck it in his pocket and became really obtuse and directly accusatory, and left and refused to provide me the medicine on that day. The purpose of these policies is for security, to ensure only authorised personnel are in restricted areas, patient safety, so that patients know who's providing their care, accountability, to ensure every action can be traced to specific identifiable professional. Analysis. By refusing to allow the patient to read the ID badge, the consultant was almost certainly in breach of their employer's Cygnet's own internal policy on identification, security and professional conduct. Regulation and law. This bit says that there may not be a specific piece of legislation titled the Doctors Must Show ID Act, but the consultant's actions contravene the principles that underpin healthcare regulation. So the Health and Social Care Act 2008, Regulated Activities Regulations 2014, says that these regulations, which are enforced by the Care Quality Commission, require providers to ensure that care and treatment are provided in a safe way, Regulation 12, and that they deploy staff who are fit and proper. A key part of being a fit and proper person is adhering to professional standards of conduct. A provider like Cygnet could be seen as failing in its duty if its staff act in a way that's unaccountable and non-transparent. We've also got the duty of candour. While this typically applies to when things go wrong, the underlying principle is one of openness and transparency with the patients at all times. The consultant's action is fundamentally at odds with this principle. The patient's right to information. Patients have a right to information about their own care and treatment. This implicitly includes the right to know the identity and qualification of the person providing that care. The official stance on the attempt to remain anonymous. The official stance from the perspective of the GMC, CQC and standard healthcare governance would be that this behaviour is unacceptable and unprofessional, and I would agree with that. It's not appropriate for a doctor to be anonymous. The consultant's a public-facing professional exercising significant power and responsibility. Anonymity has no place in this context. The GMC register exists for public verification. Consultant's refusal actively obstructed the patient from using a key public safety tool that the GMC itself provides for this exact purpose. The context is critical. This occurring during the dispensing of medication, a high-risk clinical activity. The patient's need for assurance and verification at this moment was particularly high. Subsequent provision of the name does not excuse the initial act. While it is good that the information was eventually provided, this does not negate the initial unprofessionalism. The initial refusal is a standalone issue that demonstrated a poor professional attitude and a failure to respect the patient's rights and legitimate concerns. In summary, the GMC registered psychiatric consultant's refusal was a breach of professional guidance from the GMC and almost certainly a breach of their employer's policy. It also runs contrary to the principles that underpin healthcare regulation in the UK. If you wish to take this matter further, I could go to the hospital managers, power team, CQC, GMC, etc. I might do that. Here's an interesting one. So, some months ago, a registered mental health nurse presented me with my Section 132 rights declaration to read and sign. This process is completed fortnightly as part of the procedural narrative of treatment and detention of all patients detained under section. However, the RMN both spelled my name, Brodie McLeod, incorrectly, and in addition to this, for some reason, input the phone number of the ward in the part of a document labelled hospital number. Can you see that document? Yeah, so there is the bit where it says my name. It's almost says, looks like it says broccoli, my first name, but or let the letter off for that. And then MAC and then squiggle ADLEAD. So Brodie McLeod, and the hospital number, she just wrote down the phone number, which just doesn't seem right, does it? So all patients in Cygnet hospitals are assigned hospital numbers, in this instance starting with the letters CHK, which stands for Cygnet Hospital Kewstoke. Having completed this common administrative task likely hundreds of times throughout their career, what's the likelihood of this permissibly and with the absence of absurdity being excusable as an administrative human error, and if the document attached is to be considered or potentially viewed as having been purposefully subject to intentional maladministration, is this a breach of policy, guidance, regulation or law? Based on the document and the situation you've described, it is overwhelmingly likely that the mistakes on the form would be considered excusable administrative human error. While frustrating and a clear sign of a lack of attention to detail, proving that these errors were a deliberate act of intentional maladministration would be extremely difficult. So the likelihood of human error is highly probable. It says that in this case this is simply a case of human error despite the nurse's experience. Here's why it's permissible and plausible explanation. Autopilot and repetition. When a task is performed hundreds of times, it can become automatic. This cognitive autopilot can ironically lead to simple mistakes as the person's not actively engaged in the details of the task. Environmental factors. Busy and high pressure ward environments can lead to distractions and rushed words, increasing the chance of errors. Data proximity. The nurse may have glanced at a ward information sheet or a phone list just before filling out the form, causing them to write down the number they just saw instead of the one required. And the phonetic spelling of McLeod and what they've interpreted as how it's misspelled, which isn't quite right. Common variants of the same name. It's a very frequent type of spelling mistake. For these mistakes to be viewed as something other than an error, one would need to demonstrate a motive and a pattern of similar behaviour. As an absolute incident, it falls squarely into the category of regrettable but understandable mistake. Breach of policy, guidance or law. Let's assume for the sake of your question that this could be proven to be intentional. In that highly unlikely scenario, it would be a breach on multiple levels. So intentional maladministration as a breach. If the errors were deliberate, it would constitute a serious failure to adhere to professional and legal standards. Hospital policy. Every hospital, including those run by Cygnet, has strict policies on accurate patient record keeping and identification. Intentionally recording false information on a legal document would be a serious breach of internal policy and would likely result in disciplinary action. Patient identification is a cornerstone of patient safety. Professional guidance, nursing and midwifery council. This would be a clear violation of the nursing and midwifery council code. Specifically, it would breach the duties to practice effectively. This includes keeping clear and accurate records, promote professionalism and trust, deliberately falsifying documents, erode the trust placed in the nursing profession. To prioritise people, accurate paperwork is part of ensuring a patient's rights and identity are respected, and regulations and law. In the Mental Health Act, the document itself is evidence that the hospital is fulfilling its legal duty under Section 132 to inform you of your rights. If the document is intentionally falsified, it could be argued that the hospital has failed to properly record its compliance with the Act. While it wouldn't invalidate your detention, a pattern of such behaviour could be used as evidence of procedural failings at a mental health tribunal. CQC regulations and the Care Quality Commission requires that providers maintain accurate, complete and contemporaneous records for every patient. Intentional inaccuracies are a direct breach of these fundamental standards of care and governance. In summary, while the errors are careless and unprofessional, they're almost certain to be viewed as a simple mistake. If, however, you could prove intent, it would present as a specific breach of hospital policy, professional conduct standards and the regulations underpinning the Mental Health Act. And that is all I've got from Gemini today. I want to make it clear as possible that in this envelope here, I've got a USB stick. Wherever it is, here it is. Here's the envelope, which was sent to me via Tract 48 for some reason, even though I can only assume it was made on site, with this little 256 gigabyte USB pen. I haven't put this into my computer because I don't trust it, but what I might do, actually, if I can find my TV remote, is put it into my telly, and then maybe my medical legal scrutiny checklist might be on this USB stick. You can't really see it from there. Let's move the camera a bit closer to where you can see it. There you go. Right, I'm going to give it a try, putting this USB stick into the telly, and maybe I'll be able to view the files that are on it. Let's have a look. Oh, for some what a fucking idiot I am.
When I repeated the offer.
There we go, skillful times. I don't know if you can see anymore. I'm copying this right up, and it's lunchtime. Yeah, you can see, right. Let me see if I can negotiate the menus. Put the USB stick in.
Thinks you should go on, but it's £9,000. Brad, deal or no deal?
Fuck it. I can't see that there's a file browser. There was one on my old Samsung TV, but yeah, I might have my medical legal scrutiny checklist on there. So thanks for watching this far. If you want to have a look at my other videos, it does advise me to contact the police because of the way the social worker and the investigation into my malicious communications were conducted. If I do that, I'm not going to do that on a Sunday, but I might do that tomorrow. Somebody just came to knock on my door to tell me that lunch is in 10 minutes, which is a bit atypical. Just knocked on my door and walked away. Normally they don't come to get me if you're late for lunch. They don't come until like 20 past. But he came preemptively while I was making the video to preemptively warn me that it was going to be in 10 minutes. Which, like I said, normally if somebody doesn't turn up for lunch, they wait until about past, and then they'll go around and say, yo mate, your lunch is getting cold. but mine is. So I'm going to go and eat it. My nut roast, which I'm very grateful for, and I'm thankful for you for watching this video. And if any of this seems like something you've got expertise or advice or knowledge or understanding of greater to my own, please leave a comment, and I will put the recording psychiatric consultations document and as much other corroborating stuff into the description of this YouTube video as is possible. Cheers.